Hello, San Diego.
Hi everyone, good morning. Don't be afraid to sit closer, we're not gonna bite.
Yeah. Welcome to Me, My X-Men, Superheroes, Comics, and Academic Success. First things first, Comics Gay is a hate movement, trans women are women, and Black Lives Matter. I have a microphone at San Diego Comic-Con. I am not wasting this opportunity. I am Devin Whitlock. I will be moderating this discussion. My pop culture criticism has appeared on Comicosity, Geeks Out, and Medium, where my most recent piece is an interview with Dr. Martell about his research identifying Wing as the first Asian American superhero. I am one half of the podcast Scams, Swindles, and Schemes, and help run the Chicago Public Library's Comics Book Club. Today, we will be discussing how to use comics and superheroes as tools for educational engagement, personal development, and academic success. Because two of our three panelists are remote, our format will be a bit different. Each person will speak for about 10 to 15 minutes, after which we will open the floor for 3 to 5 minutes of questions, and then move on to the next panelist. If we have time for questions for all three at the very end, we may be able to accommodate that, but let's see. Our first speaker, Dr. Sai Islam, is Vice President of Consulting with Talent Metrics and an Associate Professor of Psychology at Farmingdale State College. Dr. Islam has over 15 years of experience providing data analytics, training, and organizational development support to organizations in a variety of workplace settings. Through Talent Metrics, he has consulted with Fortune 100 companies like IBM and sports teams like the Florida Panthers. His new book is entitled Leaders Assemble, Leadership Lessons from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and was published by Emerald Publishing on June 7th. You can find more information about that book from flyers and cards at the end of the table that you can pick up after the discussion. And so without further ado,
You just need to mute us and he's already attached.
here is Dr. Sai Islam.
Thank you very much, Devin. I have to say, it sounds way better when you get introduced than when you have to introduce yourself. So thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here at San Diego Comic-Con as a lifelong nerd. This is something that we've dreamed about, and Devin is actually one of the few people that has known me for a very long time and knows what a big deal this is for us, because this is something we talked about as kids, is coming to San Diego Comic-Con, and I'm happy to be here virtually. So thank you, everybody, for having me, and I hope everyone has a good time learning a little bit about how we use comics, superheroes, to teach and to deliver academic success. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we, the development of my book. We're also going to talk a little bit about ways that you can use superheroes both in your academic work. I'll talk a little bit about my consulting work, and then also a little bit about self-development in the process of designing and delivering and developing yourself through superheroes and comics. So let's talk a little bit then about my area of psychology. Devin mentioned that I am a psychology professor at Farmingdale State College. I specialize in an area called industrial organizational psychology. And this is basically psychology as applied to the workplace. If you haven't heard of industrial organizational psychology, that's because most people, when they think of psychology, they tend to think about mental health. They tend to think about, mental illness. They tend to think about maybe child development, those areas of psychology. But I am not qualified to do any of those things. Please do not come to me for therapy, because as my wife, who is a therapist, will tell you, you will be ruined. But I do know about the workplace. And I love talking about the workplace. And that's where my knowledge of psychology gets applied, because we know lots and lots of different things about psychology. So we know how people learn, so we can help people learn in the workplace. We know how to motivate people, so we can motivate people in the workplace. So we can take all this cool stuff that we know about psychology, and we can deliver that to an audience within the workplace. And we know that most people spend the majority of our lives in the workplace, and so if we can make that better, especially after the last 2.5 years or so of working remotely, we want to make things better. This is a great way to do it. We're kind of a niche field, so we're probably one of the smaller areas of psychology, but we're growing. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has noted that IO psychologists are becoming more and more prominent in the world of work. And essentially what IO psychologists do is they take those principles of the workplace, those things that we know about psychology, and we try to make the workplace better. If you've ever seen the movie Office Space and you saw those consultants, the Bobs, if you ever meet consultants that come into your workplace, there's a good chance that they're going to be IO psychologists. They may not be, hopefully they're not the same as the Bobs, but they're there to kind of make the workplace better. The other thing that I've noticed in my experience of teaching psychology courses is many times students, especially if they're younger students, they don't have a ton of experience in a corporate environment or a traditional workplace. They might have some experience in a restaurant and other things. And so some of the concepts that we talk about in industrial organizational psychology can be very challenging. This is also true for leaders. So one of the things that I do as a consultant is I do executive coaching, which is sort of like training leaders to be better. And one of the things that happens is that there are lots and lots of leadership theories that are out there. It's very difficult for leaders to, sometimes grasp those concepts because they're very technical. They're very much rooted in science. And the same can be said of students. Students can say like, well, there's like a lot of leadership theories that you just talked about, Dr. Islam. I'm not sure what to make of all of these leadership theories. What can we do? And so pop culture provides this great framework around which we can build a common language and a way for people to have those conversations about what leadership looks like and about what industrial organizational psychology is. So it's been a lot of fun to kind of write a book and kind of touch upon this and to kind of do advocacy. One of the things that I'm very passionate about is kind of getting the word out there about industrial organizational psychology, because as a field, what we try to do is we try to take data and use research to make the workplace better. And we know over the past couple of years how many different ways the workplace can be kind of not a great place to be. And there are lots of different ways in which we can make it better. So hopefully one of the takeaways from today's session is that maybe you investigate industrial organizational psychology and maybe make your workplace a little bit better. Now, you might be wondering, well, how do we use this stuff in class? How can we use some of these concepts, this pop culture in class? One way that I do it in my courses is I like using film clips. I find them to be very illustrative. They're a great way to kind of have a conversation about a workplace. So for example, if you have, somebody like Peter Parker, he's got kind of an abusive boss that you might have heard of named J. Jonah Jameson. That's a great example to say like, hey, if you have this leader that's not a great, doesn't provide a lot of support, what do you do? And sometimes those film clips really help students to kind of engage with the material in a different way, and it gives them a way to step back a little bit and say, well, this is happening to Spider-Man. I had the same experience in my workplace. Another very common way of approaching this is through reflective writing activities. So one activity that I do with my students is sometimes I have them take a personality assessment. I have them pretend to be a character that they choose. Sometimes it's an MCU character. And then what they do from there is they kind of take that stuff and they say, oh, here's how Captain America would answer these personality questions. And then I ask them to kind of reflect on that. And I ask them to take that same personality assessment and reflect on their own experiences. So this is a way to kind of think about what type of leader you might be and what the results of a psychological assessment, what that might teach about yourself or someone else within this context. There's also other practice activities that I give. So for example, one of the key activities that we do in industrial organizational psychology is we do something called job analysis. Which is basically kind of analyzing a job and understanding what the requirements for a job happen to be. So sometimes I'll ask everybody in my class to think of what are the essential tasks for the leader of the Avengers? What does it take for somebody to actually lead this team? And they'll generate ideas about, well, here's what you need to do. You need to be able to communicate effectively. You need to be able to know technology, all of these things. Now, on a personal level, many students may say to themselves, well, I just want to self-develop. And in my executive coaching work, I also use pop culture and comic books to help leaders to develop over time. One way to do this is through reflective writing activities. So asking somebody to kind of watch a movie or read a comic book and say, hey, let's reflect on this. Does this relate to the experience that you're having now? That idea that, especially for leaders, to take a step back and to think through a problem is very, very important. one thing that we know about leaders, especially those who become executives in organizations, is they got there because they're usually pretty tough-minded folks, and they've been doing things a particular way, and when they hit a snag, they're not really sure what to do because they've been right so far. And especially within organizations, they're used to, like, I'm right, I'm the leader, I'm the manager, I'm supposed to do this correctly. But comic books, movies, they allow those leaders to take a step back and then reflect and say, oh, maybe I'm screwing up, maybe I'm not doing things exactly right. The other thing that happens, especially in leadership, is sometimes we talk about leadership theories, things like servant leadership, things like path goal theory, and they can get really complicated. And so if you watch a movie clip or you read a comic book, that can help to illustrate some of these ideas. And then it allows you to create the space where you can recognize your own leadership behaviors in those characters. Oh, looks like I'm doing what Captain America does because I know I'm always serving my team. Here are a couple of little examples that might help illustrate this, and then I'll open the floor up for some questions. So here's a leadership example, a very famous comic where Storm and Cyclops talk about how to select who should be the next leader of the X-Men. So Storm's idea here is a duel in the Danger Room. And so in Leaders Assembled, we have a whole chapter about selecting a leader. I would say that a duel probably isn't the best way to, determine who should be a leader. I mean, it's a very common trope in comics. We saw this in Black Panther as well, where he's got to battle M'Baku. But there are other ways of selecting leaders. Sometimes it's somebody who is, the best collaborator, or somebody who has a lot of managerial skills. And so there are tests and things like that you can use. But in my classes, sometimes I'll present this slide and I'll ask students like, hey, how do we choose the leader of the X-Men? Should it be a duel? Should it be something else? And what does a duel actually measure, right? And so in this situation, you're really measuring who's the most powerful. You're not really looking for the best leader. And obviously, sorry for you, Scott Summers, but Storm is definitely more powerful than you are. So you're gonna get washed in this Danger Room duel. So this is a good way for students to think about it, and it's kind of fun. They can look at this and say, oh, who's got the most power? What are we really looking for? And in industrial organizational psychology, we talk a lot about testing and things like that. Here's another example from Black Panther. Here, T'Challa is talking a little bit about the heart of his country, who is really important within his country, and he kind of illustrates this idea that the vibranium miners, the people that are at the lowest level in his country, are maybe the most important. And I like to use this as an example of servant leadership, that T'Challa, the Black Panther, his goal is to make Wakanda better. It's always to focus on what's happening with Wakanda, and to make it a better place, to make it a better a better experience for people. And I think this is also really illustrative because it shows a leader who's engaging with an audience that we normally don't think of. When we think about leaders talking with people, we think about them, communicating with other leaders. We think they're gonna stay just talking to Captain America, maybe the Illuminati. But here he's really concerned about what's happening with the miners. And I think this is a very important leadership lesson for many of my students and for some of the executives that I end up working with in my coaching practice. Right? The other cool thing is we know that we can teach kids to lead. I don't know how many of you have children who like the Spidey and Amazing Friends Disney Junior cartoon. My son is obsessed with it. There's lots and lots of great lessons that people learn from that, and you can actually use comic books to teach kids how to be a leader. You can use Marvel Cinematic Universe movies to do the same thing. I think Teen Titans Go also has some great examples of how to lead and how to do things better in a workplace. And so these are great ways to have conversations with your children about things that they're experiencing, or even experiences that you're having in work that they can draw lessons from. So I think there's always a way to frame this discussion so that you can really have great conversations that might be about the pop culture, that might be about the comic book, but could really yield some benefit for those children in your life. So I want to thank everybody, and I want to open up the floor to questions, in case there are any. But I want to thank everybody. You could reach out to me on Twitter. I waste a lot of time on Twitter. You can email me if you'd like. And you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to talk about this stuff. Hopefully everybody gets a sense that I'm super passionate about leadership and industrial organizational psychology. So I'll open up the floor to questions in case there are any. And I will go back to sharing our main slide here. Right. So Devin, do we have any questions, or have I bored everyone to tears already?
No, you're fine, Si. Do we have any questions? Anyone? Well, I'll go first then. Can you give another example of how you or someone you know has applied the principles in your book? Like not just how you've taught it, but how they've actually used it in the workplace or elsewhere.
Oh, sure. So one thing, in one of my executive coaching sessions, I had a conversation with a leader, and this leader was, much like some leaders, extremely stubborn. Very, very stubborn. And this was actually before the book came out. I used this example, and we talked a little bit about, I think I assigned him Captain America Civil War. I think I told him, here, watch this movie. We kind of talked a little bit about it beforehand. He had some interest. He liked movies, and I was like, okay, let's watch this movie, and let's talk a little bit about how to handle conflict. And because he was very stubborn, whenever we would have executive coaching sessions, he would talk about the fact that, like, well, I'm getting into arguments with my team, and we're not getting things done. I'm getting into these arguments, and I'm having these discussions, and it's not going anywhere. And so he would actually reflect on, I made him write a little 250-word response to some of the problems that he saw in leadership between Captain America and Iron Man. And eventually, during our next conversation, he came to me and he was like, well, I was watching this and I saw that, like, I could have solved everything in this situation in Captain America Civil War if we just had a conversation about it. If Captain America and Iron Man had just a normal conversation and didn't let things get in the way. And so he kind of drew this connection between what was happening in this situation and, in this made-up situation with superheroes. And he was kind of like, well, maybe I need to have deeper conversations with why there's this conflict that's happening in my workplace. And to kind of get him to that breakthrough point, it was amazing to me that he could see himself in these characters. I'm pretty sure he saw himself as a Tony Stark. Everybody wants to be Iron Man, right? But he could see that in himself, and he could really kind of reflect on it and say, oh, this is something that I'm seeing in my experience, and oh, maybe what the mistake is that's happening with these guys, maybe there's something else that I can do. Maybe there's a different change that I can do. The other example that I use pretty often, especially when it comes to reaching across the aisle, given our current political situation, we do want to draw a lesson from this about reaching across the aisle and bringing more people in. One of the most common examples that I use is in Black Panther. And we see this a lot where T'Challa in the films especially is able to reach out to M'Baku. He's able to turn somebody who's an enemy in the beginning into an ally by the end. And even when Killmonger, spoiler alert for this movie, by the way, that's been out for 5 years, even Killmonger, he does outreach to him. He says, hey, I can save you. Let me save you so that you can be part of this community. And there's something powerful in that, especially given what we think of in terms of business culture, where it's kill or be killed. If an enemy dies, that's good. But the lesson from Black Panther, and even from the comics to a certain extent, the lesson from the comics is that you don't need to take out your enemy, that there's an opportunity to bring somebody in. And in fact, one of the biggest tropes in comics that we know is the villain becoming part of the hero's team, right? They just announced X-Men 97 is going to be led by good old Magneto, right? So that's a huge change. But that's the cool thing about pop culture and about comics in general is that, even though you might be a villain, you can always reverse the Dark Knight quote, right? You can start off a villain and then eventually become a hero.
Thanks, I.
Of course, thank you. Let me stop my share in case, right, and I think Valentino's up.
Yep, yeah, all right. Our next speaker is Valentino L. Zullo, the Anisfield Wolf Postdoctoral Fellow in English and Public Humanities at Ursuline College. He is the former Ohio Center for the Book Scholar in Residence, where he continues to co-lead the Get Graphic program. He is the American editor of the Journal of Graphic Novels and Comics. He is also a licensed independent social worker in psychoanalytic training at the Cleveland Psychoanalytic Center, where he facilitates the psychoanalytic psychotherapy program. He has published articles and reviews in the Journal of Graphic Novels and Comics, Inks, the Journal of the Comics Studies Society, the Journal of Popular Culture, and more. He is co-editor with Vera Camden of the recent Wonder Woman 80 Years Later, published by Routledge. Valentino?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? I hope so. I am going to share my screen now. I don't know, I can't see all of you, so I'm not sure if you can see me or if I'm just a disembodied voice. Hopefully I'm not a disembodied voice for you all. All right, so I am just going to talk about my work in the public library, and since we're talking about education, I'm interested in, I teach comics in the public library. As Devin said, I am a postdoc in public humanities at Ursuline College. The Cleveland Foundation funded this position because they believe in the public humanities, and so that's what I've been doing for nearly 10 years now at the Cleveland Public Library, running the Get Graphic program. So I figured I'd give you some insight into what I've been doing there, and give you some of our resources that we have. Also, as the exact opposite person to Sai in some ways, I am a therapist, so you can contact me. But no, not really. You should find somebody that's not me. But I just thought it was too perfect. You're like, don't call me, and I was like, well, no, I do actually see patients, and this is sort of funny. We're both on the same panel. So I am a psychoanalyst. Yes, it does mean that I am sort of Freudian. I'm not super Freudian, but I am an heir to the Freudian tradition. So we don't talk about things like penis envy anymore, so don't worry. But I do the 4-day-a-week psychoanalysis with people, which is pretty intense and pretty fun. All right, anyway, so that's who I am. So teaching comics in public libraries. So in 2014, I created the Grit Graphics program at the Cleveland Public Library, and it's with the Ohio Center for the Book at the Cleveland Public Library. The Ohio Center for the Book is a designation of the Library of Congress that is intended to support literacy and the book arts in Cleveland and in Ohio at large. Every state has a Center for the Book, so if you do not know where your Center for the Book is, look for it, and you should go work with them, because the Centers for the Book are great institutions in your state that work to promote literacy. I'm all about working with the institutions that are already there and sort of expanding their reach as opposed to creating new institutions. It's why I went to the library and didn't create a comic society. Not that I could have done that anyway, but some of the threads that I won't be able to talk about too much in here, but I'm trained as a social worker and as a PhD in English, but I think one of the threads that I think we need to focus on, this, I'm sure I overlap this high if we're able to talk more, that I think too often, especially in social work, we create new institutions as opposed to, extending the reach of the institutions that are already there. And so I think, work with your public libraries, and that's sort of my push here. As scholars, I think it's the most important work that we can do is work with our libraries, even if it's just giving like a talk. But I don't want our voices to be limited to the academy and to private businesses. I want them to be in the communities. And so, whether that's, in the libraries or connecting with libraries and working with your coffee shops too through the library or your comic book shops. But I think too often, we're, as scholars, we should get out there further. What I'm interested in, and I hope that you all are interested too, is thinking about postgraduate education. That could mean post-high school, post-college, postgraduate school. People live decades after they go to college, right? And they don't engage with the humanities after they're gone from college. Let's say if you're 20, you graduate at 22, you live for 6, 7 decades after that, and we don't engage them in the humanities after that. And I think, we focus so much on making sure that we think about education during those 4 years, 4, 5, 6, whatever, 13 for those of us who went to school for 13 years. I think that that's part of this push. Is the Get Graphic program is about extending the reach of the humanities outside of the walls of the academy. So just give you a brief, sort of some insight. This is some of our old flyers. So we've been doing the Get Graphic program since 2014. It's turned into a bi-weekly book club. We do workshops in the local coffee roastery. Like we actually do it like where they roast the coffee. We actually make comics there because I don't know, I'm all about comics and grit. So like I just think that comics, that they're not clean. I don't want to clean comics up. I want to make autobiographical comics or superhero comics, whatever you're making, like in these, like in old warehouse buildings. This is an old warehouse building where they roast coffee and we create comics there. My focus though is on just sort of helping people tell their own stories, critically thinking, but also critically making. I want people to critically make together. I think there's so many ways that we can engage with works, and that's what we try to do here. And so I'm going to give you some resources, but I'm just going to sort of go through some of this. I'm interested, as I said, in the public library, sort of, which I mentioned already, because I think it's one of the last spaces, and I'm not the only one to say this, but it's one of the last spaces that are sort of public and free, that we can actually, utilize for thinking, and not have to buy something, right? I mean, I always ask my students, like, what are the public spaces that are left? And one of them, you got you got the library, the parks, and the highway, right? So, I mean, I think that so many spaces become privatized, and I'm interested in us preserving public spaces, because our academies, our colleges, even when they're public institutions, are hardly public spaces anymore. You can see I push back against our admins a lot. You can imagine that. But so anyway, that's a separate. I don't want to go over my time. So, but I'll keep going. I just had some quotes. I think what we do is we try to create dialogue. We try to create, connect people. I think most of the work that gets done in humanities discourse is between people conversing, not just like creating spaces for them. I think we're meant to be like sort of to help curate. I think as scholars we curate and we help, but we sort of help. We do the work of reading everything so that other people, and show them what we think we should, what we suggest. And I think that we want to create spaces for dialogue after we curate the work. We've also created reading lists for people, readers advisory. We create our book clubs. We also create readers advisory, which I think is really useful. Again, I think it's the role that the scholar can take, sort of being that person that curates and sort of imagines and sort of supports people in what they might read, what books. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of stuff printed every day. I think some of what we can do is help people point them to the works that would be most useful to them, asking them what they need and pointing them what is most useful to them, and also at large thinking what's most useful for our communities and for others. And so we try to do that at Cleveland Public Library. We've created other types of speaker series. I talked about the comics making. I realized 10 minutes is a lot less time than I thought, so I'm just going to go through this. So the thing I wanted to show you, though, was that we created some toolkits for you to create your own comic courses. Unfortunately, none of these are superhero comics yet, even though my deep love is for superhero comics. And I know that we're supposed to talk about superhero comics. And believe me, I have many. I probably have between 20 and 30,000 comics. So I have a lot. But we created some toolkits at the Ohio Center for the Book, which will allow you to create your own comic book courses. We have 11 toolkits up right now for works like T. Bowie's The Best We Could Do, Marjan Satrapi's Persepolis, Riyad Sattouf's The Arab of the Future. And the works often, they'll tell you about the comic, tell you who the author is, give you a context for the comic. We offer you questions for discussion. We also provide you with quotes from interviews, but then each one then with links to the interviews too, if you want to look more into the interview, and then with questions that then are connected to the quotation from the interview that we've chosen. We also then quote from scholars. So I went and read all these articles from all these different scholars on every single book and found discussions that they would write, and then questions to go along with that as well. So if you want to create a comics course, whether in your public library, in your college or university, these toolkits, and there's 11 of them, so there's a whole semester worth, and we're continuing to work on them, and also eventually there'll be hopefully like 30, so you can have like 2 semesters worth, that you can go through and you can have different levels. You can start with just questions for discussion. If it's just like, I don't want to get into some of the scholarship, but if you do, we have interviews and scholarships that you can also include. We have select pages that you might focus on, and we have questions related to those as well. Then we have further supplemental materials, so they're like YouTube videos and stuff like that. And then further reading, if your group wants to read further. If you're interested in Southeast Asian history, there's stuff for you to look at. If you're interested in other stories documenting the refugee experience, there's stuff for you to look at. If you're interested in other autobiographical stories, this is one example of 11 of them that are up right now on the Ohio Center for the Book. But that's mostly what I wanted to come and talk about was, hey, if you're an educator or a librarian or just somebody in between that wants to that needs help creating a comic book club or class, at the Ohio Center for the Book, we have done that. We've created materials for you to use so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have everything, and if you just want to use our YouTube videos, if you just want to use our questions, you don't want to print out these toolkits, that's fine too. But all this stuff will give you extra material. So you can find all that stuff at the Ohio Center for the Book.org. The link, after the slash is something random, so I didn't put up this. Just go to Ohio Center for the Book.org, or just go to Google, type in Ohio Center for the Book, get graphic toolkits, they'll come up. Feel free, you can always, if you want these PDFs, I can also give them to you. You can come to my website, bzullo.com. If you want to go, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, any of them. I'm always happy to chat. I always answer messages. I don't tweet a lot, and I don't Instagram a lot, and I hardly ever Facebook anymore because, I don't know, more and more I think Facebook is super evil, but I will respond to your messages on any of these, but I'm not a big tweeter or Instagrammer, but I always respond to messages, especially if you're somebody that wants to teach or just wants to talk about teaching. Like if you're already doing it and you just want to throw stuff at me too and be like, hey, I have all these materials, you might be interested in. I love that too. So I'm always up for that. All right, so that gives us about 10 minutes for talking about these things, which was my goal. So why don't I stop there? And I have other stuff after this. If there's silence, I can talk about other stuff. But I think, anybody want to talk about creating comic book clubs or classes? Or anything else, you can ask me anything else.
Yeah. All questions, any questions? Yes.
So Devin, I can't hear the question. So if the person is done, do you mind repeating it?
The question is about finding age-appropriate comics for starting for second graders, seventh graders. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of resources online that are really good. I think I can just give you people like Raina Telgemeier is great. She's one of my favorite comics. I'm sure you all know who she is already, but Raina Telgemeier is perfect for kids. I love her work. Guts, I think, is one of her best works. It's about anxiety, and as a therapist, I think it's fantastic. Mariko Tamaki, Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me, is a great book. One of I would say, DC's Inks series. They have an Ink series, like Superman Smashes a Clan by Jean Luen Yang, and they have I think He Brought Me the Ocean, which is a Aqualad story. DC's Ink series is excellent. That's all YA stuff. Marvel has a similar line of YA stuff. They have a Miles Morales book right now. I can't remember what they're calling that imprint. But I think there's lots of great YA stuff that you can find. We have not created a advisory for that, but that's a great question. Something we should definitely do is age group wise. I'm thinking adult, which is mostly what I work with. I think of postgraduate adult, but that's a great question. What do for YA stuff on seventh graders? But I definitely recommend the DC Inks imprint. I definitely recommend, as I said, Raina Telgemeier, Mariko Tamaki is a fantastic. Mariko Tamaki has a queer YA line, and I think Random House Graphic has a lot of great YA stuff. That would be fantastic. They started a comic book imprint, Random House Graphic, that I think would be perfect for that. So I hope that answers the question. It's hard. I can't see you, so I can't say okay, that's answering it. I rely so much on what I can see, and I was I don't know if I'm answering this or not for you. So I hope that helps. I hope that gives you some examples of works that you might incorporate into, you might bring to your seventh graders. Yes, question over here.
Your Get Graphics toolkit looks amazing. So first, the compliment was fantastic.
the Get Graphic toolkit looks great. Is it updated, and how can someone find more resources? You said? Or an age range for it.
Okay, so the age range is definitely they're definitely for, I would say, the questions are 18 and up, meaning that they're not explicit in any way, but they're 18 and up in that our program is just specifically focused on postgraduate. You can, I think if you want, I mean, not that you couldn't tailor these to other programs, like I said, there's nothing we don't, not asking anything that's too explicit that a 13-year-old couldn't do. But I think if you wanted to tailor them, you could definitely do that. You could think about rephrasing some of the questions if you wanted. You might I think we imagine these being used in different ways. You could just print them out and bring them to your class or your book club, or just you sort of have it as sort of an outline for yourself as you sort of rephrase and rewrite some of it. But definitely the questions are geared towards an adult audience, and I mean that in sense we work with adults. It's one of just as an aside, it's one of the things I think public libraries, at least in Ohio, at least in Cleveland, I should say, not even all of Ohio, we're very good at offering resources and a program for under 18. The 18 to 99 age group is often the group that we tend to disregard, which is still a large age group. 90, let's say 125, because it's not even 99. But and I think so that's what this was for, is offering that. And we do have the #1 and the #4 public library in the country in our county. So I think the Cleveland Public Library is #4, Cuyahoga County Public Library is #1 in circulation. So we were basing it off of us that we don't have a lot of resources for adults. We have a lot for under 18. That being said, all of these could be used for, you could definitely revise them and just use them as an outline for yourself. They're at the Ohio Center for the Book. Or if you follow me on Twitter, I realized that it's pinned, which I only just realized because somebody just liked it on my Twitter page. That the links to the toolkits are pinned up there. So if you go to the Twitter, you can find a link pretty easily there.
Thanks, Valentino.
Yeah.
I'm afraid we're out of time for questions for right now, but our final speaker is Dr. Mark Martell. He obtained a PhD in Educational Policy Studies from the University of Illinois at Chicago, where he has worked since the year 2000. Dr. Martell has been the director of the UIC Asian American Resource and Cultural Center since 2015, and is also co-principal investigator of the UIC Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander Serving Institutions Initiative, which since 2010 has offered $7.1 million to contribute to the retention, engagement, and graduation of AAPI students. At UIC, he teaches courses such as Asian Americans in Pop Culture, Superheroes in Cultural Mythology, and Student Diversity, Access, and Equity in Urban Higher Education. Dr. Martell wrote the chapter Narrative Approaches to Exposing the Racialized Experiences of Asian American Male Students for the book Teaching to Close the Achievement Gap for Students of Color, published by Routledge in 2020, and the article From Invisible to Invincible, Asian American Superheroes in Comics for the Journal of Comics and Culture, published by Pace University Press in 2022. A comic book collector since the mid-1980s, Dr. Martell combines his academic knowledge and his love for comics and pop culture to combat ignorance, inequity, and injustice for a better tomorrow.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna remove my mask so it's easier to understand me. I think there's enough distance to keep everyone safe, and the staff here are doing an amazing job to sanitize every piece of the podium and the tables after we're done. Sai and Luca, I am gonna minimize you so that I could share my screen. I'll keep unmuted so that you could hear me speak, but use your imagination. In the next 15 minutes or so, I will be sharing with you the two courses that I teach that centers on comics and superheroes. Don't know how to get rid of the Zoom, but so I'm going to be sharing 16 weeks of content in 15 minutes, so I'm going to skim through the most important part. And I'll share some examples and also some evaluation feedback that I got from my students. And hot off the press, you all get to see my syllabi before my students do. So no spoilers out there, all right? If you want to follow along, I did provide a short link that you could access, go.uic.edu/sdcc. It is a Google link, so you might have to log in depending on your phone to access it, but I will go ahead and maximize the Word document that I have of the two. So I'll start out with the Superhero and Cultural Mythology course, which is a freshman course that in the Honors College where I offer the course. It is a course that I inherited where I take the approach of taking a historical, societal, cultural approach to what is a superhero. And it is a 90-minute course, 75-minute course, where students are assigned 3 major assignments. I've inserted a quiz halfway through the semester where they do a squad presentation. Gen Zs love to be in groups, so I tend to put them in groups. And then their final project, and I'll go into detail for all of these, is to create an original superhero based on their cultural identities. And I'll be sure to share a little bit of some of those. And then I do a little fun final quiz on Kahoot, and then attendance and participation. So as I mentioned, the purpose of this course, Superhero and Cultural Mythology, is to dissect what is a superhero, right? And a lot of my students really just know what they see in the movies or on TV shows. Some have read comics, some are exposed to it to their parent or grandparents. But in generally, we look at what is a superhero or why superheroes, why are we even looking at comics or superheroes, and I use various chapters from comic studies authors, and you could see in the syllabus, I've noted who they are. This is a new topic that I want to look at is superheroes as immigrants, right? If you think of Superman, Wonder Woman, a lot of our superheroes come from different places. So we want to start off with kind of using a racial or cultural lens to the course. And then we look at mythology, legends, and folklore. How do they differ? And I have my students kind of share what is their favorite Disney movie, because that goes into what is called the monomyth formula, where a character goes on an adventure, gets a sidekick, does some good, defeats evil, and then comes back home to a better tomorrow. So I kind of have them share some of their mythologies from their background, because as we know, superheroes are mythological themselves. And then I kind of have them reflect on their own cultural mythology, and I'll go into that in a moment. But we also talk about superheroes as a metaphor. What does it mean to be a superhero? And what are the ideologies of a superhero, right? They're here to provide hope in some way, right? And then I have them read the very first appearance of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. The reason why is I like to focus on DC's Trinity, just because I feel like no other comic company really has a Trinity. I know Marvel tried to or tries to, but I think DC does that very well. And the reason why I have them reflect on the DC's Trinity is then I will have them identify trinities within their own cultural background, right? I'm Filipino, so I expose them to Filipino mythology or gods, and then identify 3 that would reflect the Trinity of Filipino culture. And then I give them a brief overview of how superheroes and comics evolved from the golden age to modern age, or also known as reboots. And then their first assignment is to identify a chosen myth of theirs and explain how they interpret it tied to the world. And then I have them eventually tie that myth to an existing superhero, right? So that they kind of connect identity to modern pop culture. Eventually they share it in class, and then I share with them the different tropes that superheroes fall into, so that I kind of have a dissection of superhero identities or genres. And then we explore the topic of superheroes and ethics. Can superheroes kill? And if a superhero does kill, are they still a superhero, right? And I actually have them do a debate in class. And one of my prompts is, superheroes can kill. And then I have them pro and con. And then the next prompt is, superheroes can kill a child if it's destined to be a supervillain. And then a lot of the responses change in that prompt, right? So it's exciting to see how they debate that. And I have them read things that kind of challenge ethics. So I have them read Injustice, God Among Us, right? No spoilers here, hopefully you've read it. Superman turns evil, or a dictator. I have them read Uncanny X-Force, the Apocalypse Solution, where a baby Apocalypse who's destined to be a villain is born, and there's a debate on whether that child should be killed. So I have them debate that. We watch clips from The Boys as well. If you're not familiar with The Boys, it's very adult-oriented, and they do end up killing folks. And then they share that existing superhero that they tie their cultural myth to. We also watch the movie Unbreakable, which some have seen it, some have not. And this kind of sets up the supervillain angle of the course, which in reality is really an origin superhero, right, if you've seen the movie before. So we kind of have a day or a week dedicated to superheroes, supervillains. And then I have them do midterm presentations. Now, the midterm presentations historically have been graphic novels that each group is assigned, and then they kind of, share what they've learned and tied it to the graphic novel. But now I decided to use a book called All New, All Different by Hamilton and Anderson, who basically look at racial superheroes in history, and how some titles contributed to racism throughout history, and how modern superheroes have evolved in that essence. So I'm having them present a chapter from each book, and then I'm having Kelly Sue DeConnick come to my campus along with Jean Ha to talk about Historia and Jean Ha's title, May. So that'll be in October. And then we have a focus on female superheroes, because it's rare that female superheroes have a focus. So I definitely want to elevate female superheroes. I have them focus on diversity as well, where each student chooses a superhero that they relate to. And this is a great way for students who may have a disability to kind of share, oh, I have ADHD, or I have a hidden disability, or even my LGBTQ students say, I relate to this superhero because they identify as LGBTQ. So it's a way for folks to really feel accepted in the classroom. And then we're going to have a focus, this is a new section that I am focusing on based on the article I wrote, Asian American Superheroes in Comics, the Trojan Horse formula, where the approach of a Trojan horse is used in modern superheroes to make Asian American superheroes palatable for non-Asian readers. So we're going to have a little bit of a discussion on that. I bring a guest speaker, Dr. Brian Cremens, who's going to talk about Reggie Byers' Sherilyn and the Black and White Boom from his book, The Other 1980s, Reframing Comics and Crucial Decade. He is from Harper College. My university closes on election day, so I'm giving them a week off so they could work on their superhero presentations, which I'll share with you in a moment some examples of that. And they do upload it on Instagram. So if you are on Instagram, I'm going to share that with you later. You could definitely like the posts that they've created. I give them Thanksgiving week off, and then that's where the finals presentations start, where they share the original superhero they've created that was tied to their cultural myth from the beginning that reflects an existing superhero, and then their original superhero. So I have about 5 or so minutes. So that's how it ends. And then my second course is the History, Comics, and Society course, where we look at graphic novels reflecting society, and I do that by themes. And the first couple of weeks, I model how students should do it. We explore the topic of why comics, reading comics. We look at oppression by reading X-Men Days of Future Past. race and ethnicity, I have them choose their own adventure by reading certain titles that focus on identity, racial identity. We focus on feminism. We have them read Bitch Planet. This semester, we're going to look at reproductive rights because that's a big topic to explore right now. I'm going to have them read Man Eaters by Chelsea Kane. And then LGBTQ, we're going to look at Mark Russell's Exit Stage Left, the Snagglepuss Chronicles. Mental health, we have them read a title called Polarity. Disability, where we look at Hawkeye. Relationships, to have them read The Flintstones. Family, we look at Vision. And then we end with the topic of legacy, and I have them read the title Green Lantern Legacy. And then for their final, they have to recommend a graphic novel for us to consider, and it explores societal themes, right? So in the last couple of minutes that I may have, I'm gonna go ahead and share the Instagram that you can follow. So if you go to UIC, at UICHON121, you'll see all the superheroes that my students have created in the past 3 or 4 years. Here's an example. One of my Muslim students created a character named Salma, whose superpower is ASL, where if they sign something, it appears. So the person could sign like a parachute, and then a parachute will appear, and they could use that as a resource. And then in my 201, they can have an option to recommend a graphic novel, or they could create a comic themselves. And here's one example as well. Last semester, a student decided to do art to reflect her own mental health challenges and transfer that to art via comic studies. So I'm just gonna go ahead and share, in closing, some feedback here from my students. You know, they've appreciated how it motivated them to explore their own cultures, looking at comics through different lenses, the unique approach to academic and critical thinking using comics, and then being able to use comics as a medium to talk to their dad about comics, right? Because they never had that relationship with a parent until they took the course. So I'll go ahead and stop there and offer again our Twitters if you all have further questions, but I'll ask one question because I think they're asking me to wrap up and they need to sanitize the space. So any questions regarding what I've just shared with you? Again, the Google link has all the details to my syllabi, and you could definitely reach out to me and ask more questions. Yeah.
What do you feel about the discussion of collective journey and its relationship to the monolith?
Yeah, collective journey, that's a deep question, so I may not be able to provide you a deep answer there. So can you reframe what you're trying to ask me?
Well, I'm fascinated on the discussion of the monolith. I personally believe the collective journey is more socially relevant. So I'm just wondering if it's part of your program or the discussion.
Yeah, so it is. So I use the monomyth formula based on either their readings or their Disney character favorite Disney movie. And considering they're Gen Z, they're very collective-minded. So I bring up how do certain teams, like squads, like Avengers, Justice League, solve or go through an adventure in superhero, story. So they kind of adopt the different steps to a monomyth formula to the comic book adventure. Yeah. So I'll stop there because I think we all have to go. Thank you so much. And you want to close this off, and we'll go ahead and I'll stick around too if you have questions after.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I'm afraid we're out of time for any more questions. Have a great rest of your Comic-Con.